the mass production of unsecured marks. The result was the collapse of the German currency in 1923. German industrialists began to openly sabotage all events of paying reparation obligations, which eventually provoked the famous occupation of the Ruhr. A Franco-Belgian occupation of the Ruhr in January of 1923. The backstage leaders of the British Empire waited for this to make France bog down in the adventure and, by proving France's inability to solve the problem, to take the initiative into their own hands. The new project was developed in the bowels of J.P. Morgan and Company with the direction of the Bank of England's private bank Montagu Norman. The project was based on the ideas of the representative of Dresdner Bank H. Zomer Schacht, formulated by him in March of 1922 at the suggestion of John Foster Dulles, the future Secretary of State in the office of American President Dwight D. Eisenhower and the brother of Allen Dulles, the future director of the CIA, a legal advisor to President Woodrow Wilson at the Paris Peace Conference, 1919. Dulles passed a note to the main trustee of J.P. Morgan & Co. Then J.P. Morgan & Company recommended Schacht to Norman, and the last, to the Weimar rulers. In December of 1923 Schacht became the manager of the Reichsbank. He played the crucial role in bringing together Anglo-American and German financial circles. In the summer of 1924 this project, known as the Dawes Plan, named after the chairman of the committee of experts who prepared it, an American banker, director of one of the banks in the Morgan Group, was adopted at the London Conference. It provided having the reparations and solved the question of the sources of their coverage. However, the main objective was to provide favorable conditions for American investments, which was possible only with the stabilization of the German mark. To do this, the plan called for Germany a large loan in the amount of $200 million, half of which is accounted to the House of Morgan. The Anglo-American banks established control not only over the translation of the German payments, but also over the budget, the monetary system, and to a large extent, over the credit system of the country. By August of 1924 the old Deutschmark was replaced by a new one. The financial position of Germany stabilized. Germany, however, fell into complete financial dependence on the British Empire. First, due to the fact that the annual reparations were paid to cover the amount of allied debt, the so-called absurd Weimar Circle formed. Gold, which Germany paid in the form of war reparations, was sold to and vanished in the USA, where in a form of help it was returned to Germany according to the plan. Germany gave it to England and France, and they in turn pay back military debt to the USA. The USA propped it with interest and sent it again to Germany. As a result, everyone in Germany lived on debt, and it was clear that if Wall Street withdraws its loans the country would suffer complete bankruptcy. From my perspective, the aforementioned absurd Weimar Circle was used against the USSR in the years of perestroika. Otherwise, it is simply impossible to explain the decrease in the gold reserves of the USSR of 2,140 tons from 1985 to 1991. At the same time, the Soviet Union's foreign debt increased more than 5 times. It might be hypothesized that all of these actions were carried out on the personal instructions of Mikhail Gorbachev. According to some experts, military transport aircraft of the USSR were used to secretly transport the gold to Frankfurt, the financial capital of Europe. After a series of leaks, Soviet military leaders opposed the incredible corruption campaign, and then, on May 28, 1987, Matthias Rust's flight to Moscow was organized, which made it possible for Gorbachev to hold a large-scale purge of the protesters from the Ministry of Defense and the Air Defense Forces, who spoke out against the abuses concerning gold. As was said in an interview by Army General Peter Dutch-Nierken, the Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Air Force from 1991 to 1997, Rust's flight was a planned provocation by Western intelligence services. And most importantly, it was carried out with the consent and knowledge of individuals from the then Soviet leadership. This view is shared by Igor Panarin, the former colonel in the KGB. He said, "It was a brilliant operation, developed by Western intelligence agencies. After 20 years it becomes apparent that the intelligence community, and it's no longer a secret to anyone, could bring to the implementation of an ambitious project people from Mikhail Gorbachev's inner circle," and they counted the reaction of the General Secretary of the CPSU with absolute precision. The goal was simple: to decapitate the Soviet armed forces, to significantly weaken the position of the Soviet Union in the international arena. See who was behind Matthias Rust's flight. May 26, 2007. Secondly, although the formal loans were for payments, it was actually the restoration of the military-industrial potential of the country. 70% of revenues were provided by American bankers, mostly J.P. Morgan banks, which were closely associated with the British Empire. As a result, already in 1929 German industry came in second place in the world, but it was largely controlled by the British Empire and the United States. By 1933 key sectors of German industry and big banks were under the control of American-British finance capital. Simultaneously there was funding of the Nazi Party and of Adolf Hitler personally, who was being prepared for an attack on the USSR. Since the autumn of 1929, after the Bank of England provoked the collapse of the Federal Reserve and the United States stock market, began the third phase of the strategy of financial circles of the British Empire. The Federal and the House of Morgan decided to stop lending to Germany, inspiring a banking crisis and an economic depression in Europe. In September of 1931 the British Empire abandoned the gold standard, deliberately destroying the international system of payments and completely blocking the financial oxygen to the Weimar Republic. The NSDAP begins to rank second in the Reichstag, and then its funding was activated from abroad. The main link between major German industrialists and foreign financiers became the aforementioned H-Zollverschaft. On January 4, 1932, the head of the Bank of England, Montagu Norman, met with Adolf Hitler and Franz von Papen, and concluded a secret agreement about financing the Nazi Party. American politicians, the Dulles brothers, also attended this meeting. Thus, in 1932 the Dulles brothers were actively involved in the implementation of the global plans of the British Empire. On January 14, 1933, Hitler had a meeting with Schroeder, Papen and Kettler, during which Hitler's program was fully approved. There the question of transferring power to the Nazis was finally settled, and on January 30 Hitler became Chancellor. The implementation of the fourth stage of the strategy then began. The relation of the Anglo-American ruling circles with the new government was extremely sympathetic. When Hitler refused to pay reparations, which of course put into question the payment of war debts, neither the British Empire nor France complained about the payments. Moreover, after H-Zollverschaft, again, the head of the Reichsbank, trip to the United States in May of 1933, and his meeting with the president and the biggest Wall Street bankers, America contributed new loans for Germany, totaling $1 billion. And in June, during a trip to London and a meeting with Montagu Norman, Schacht successfully sought an English loan of $2 billion and a reduction, and then cessation of payments on old loans. Thus, the Nazis got what the previous governments could not achieve. In the summer of 1934 the British Empire entered into the Anglo-German Transfer Agreement, which became one of the pillars of British policy toward the Third Reich. By the end of the 1930s Germany turned into the major trading partner of England, and Kurt Baron von Schroeder's bank became the main agent of Great Britain in Germany. In 1936 his office in New York City combined with the House of Rockefeller to create the investment bank Schroeder, Rockefeller and Company. Thus, from the perspective of information warfare, the Great Depression was a strategic information operation for the conservation of world domination by the British Empire, the elimination of the main competitors of the British Empire, the USA, the USSR, Germany, France, and a way of organizing a global economic crisis and the Second World War. It should be emphasized that in the early 1930s of the 20th century, the USSR was developing rapidly and dynamically, creating heavy industry. The growth of the Soviet economy was about 20%. Similarly, USSR is now developing, China about 9%.